Gee whiz, it's time for the Coulda Beans quiz, the comp with pump and circumstance, and the chance to cop from the ABC shop some Butte loot. What a hoot! Jeffrey, if you'd be so kind, shoot.
Can do, Unc. It's 10-1 here on 3LO with the Coulda Been champions. Tony and Simon have been sifting through a fabulous round of entries with some petulant incidents that we had never even heard of, much less a huge swathe of petulant incidents we'd forgotten all about until being reminded by the entries. And it's been very hard to pick a winner. There'll be a lot of acts of sheer frustration out there in Radio Land when people realise that they've missed out. But Tony?
Might be a controversial result because I'm picking it today. Simon refused to. Just a letter that we got. It wasn't a petulant act, but it's a funny act. From a Lyle Walter, I hope that's the correct name, down in Hamilton. He's telling a story about a bloke who was a boundary umpire in the 50s when the Hamilton Imperials, he was the boundary umpire for the Hamilton Imperials, and he used to do tricks and everything like that. However, one particular day, a fox terrier kept following Paddy around the boundary, and when the ball went out of bounds, it would bark and yap at Paddy's heels. H-E-E-L-S rather than H-E-A-L-S. This continued all day. In the last quarter, the ball came out on Paddy's side and perhaps the dog actually nipped him. So to the delight of the crowd and to the surprise of the ruckman, Paddy picked up the fox terrier and threw it over his head instead of the ball. I don't know whether it's true, but it's a good story.
And while we're on correspondence received, Tony, I really have to acknowledge this one from John Murray out there in Ivanhoe. And he says this: I realise the 50s was a decade we'd all prefer to forget.
Yes. But
it passes his understanding how our entire discussion of great screamers last week could fail to have mentioned Carlton's Keith Warburton. And John Murray said, honour where honour's due. Well, there you've got it.
Yes.
Honour to Keith Warburton.
Yeah. Okay, a letter that we received from the Burn Warwick Cappers, Pink Boots faction, Andrew and Michael from out at Vermont. Fellas, not too much imagination, pulling it straight out of a book. However, the one that did take mine, in the 1890s, Carlton VFA had a weak side and was playing a few men short. During the game, a spectator wearing a hat and coat ran onto the ground and dashed around the wing. The umpire stopped play, but the spectator declared that as a member, he was entitled to play as his side was short. He was allowed to stay on, after a bit of petulance, as long as he removed his hat and coat.
And that's what we're looking for, your top 10 of great petulant on-field games.
And there were a number that bobbed up again and again, but some of the more unusual ones that I'd forgotten were Bill Goggin putting the note under the ball at three-quarter time.
Yes.
Remember that one? I'd completely forgotten that one. Another one which I had forgotten was the Geelong cheer squad burning their floggers.
Oh, yes.
In the first semi-final in 1969. That was a good one. And so many people had various petulant acts by Robbie Muir, but the Let the Eagles Fly at Yarraville Action Faction, who selected those previous two I mentioned, had what I've always felt was one of his great petulant acts, which was punching Dennis Collins at Moorabbin with about 2 minutes to go in the game. St Kilda about 10 goals in front.
Yeah, actually, although we tried not to
Robbie's never heard the expression scoreboard, which is what one does when somebody's irritating you and you're 10 goals in front. You say the words scoreboard.
Yeah, exactly. From Daniel Butler of Ballarat. He is the founder of the I Have a Frank Gumbleton footy card and will swap for anything faction. Has got 10 Phil Carman acts. Carman for headbutting an umpire.
He's got all 10 are the great Phil.
Yeah, but Carman leaving Essendon, Carman leaving North Melbourne, Carman leaving Melbourne, Carman headbutting umpire Carberry, Carman asking for pardon from the Queen, almost. Yeah, I think that's probably why I didn't. But Carman fighting with Ron Barassi at three-quarter time, and Carman leaving the Bendigo Football League on the eve of the finals. Now, that was an act of petulance.
But see, a lot of these petulant acts that have bobbed up so far aren't actually ones that occurred on the field, whereas the Robbie Muir one is.
Well, that's right.
The
one that wasn't on the field that Peter Fuller got, which rather tickled my fancy, was Ian Collins' remark about Marty Christensen. I thought that was pretty petulant. And another one which I liked was any player at the tribunal who allows his advocate to say, quote, suspension will be a life sentence for this player, unquote. I must say, I do agree with that.
From Terry Toomey at Montmorency, a good lot. In fact, you ran about fourth. Ronnie Wearmouth deliberately kicked the football over the grandstand after being free-kicked on the wing in the first match of the year at Arden Street in 1981. He later repeated the effort in a grand final while playing for Port Fairy.
Down at Waterloo.
Oh, yeah.
Brian Wilson initially refused to leave the ground after being dragged by Ron Barassi. It's surprising, a lot of entries. Barassi's got a bit to answer for.
He does. That was when Wilson stood on the boundary line and just stared at him, didn't he?
That's right, and he said he'd like 2 seats in the coach's box as he was going off and gestured. Doug Booth turned up a lot, of course.
The famous dog incident at Waverley.
One which is a real beauty, and this entry got it, along with a lot of others. Peter Bazasto for punching a dressing room window and effectively ending his career after a match in Perth 1984.
Now, the Please Give Shane Zantuck One Last Chance to Snot Ron Barassi faction, of course, put as their number 1 petulant act Shane Zantuck's altercation with Barassi at three-quarter time in 1984, which a lot of people had. That was quite
a lot of people could have seen enough times to be able to have lip-read a transcript of the entire incident.
That's right. And the one that they did have, which not many other people, in fact, I'm not sure anybody else had, was when Billy Picken threw his boot at Alan Martello. Remember that one? And I think they were the only people who picked that one up, but they weren't quite good enough to win. Now, I'll just mention the Guru Bob for Umpires Advisor campaign, who have put a PS on their entry, when will the Master be back? Well, the Master will be back in about 5 weeks, I think.
Yes,
Jeff, 4 weeks now.
Look, I can't give you the round, because with the way the draw is, I can never tell what round it is anymore, but somewhere around mid-July.
Anyway,
Guru Bob will be back in.
They've suggested we should read out some of the great prize-winning competition entries from years gone by, and we might do that one week. Ian is custodian of them, but one that they had, but not many people had, was the 1967 TFL Grand Final between Wynyard and North Hobart.
Is this
Remember
the goalpost incident?
When the supporters stole the goalpost, that's right, and that was I thought that was quite a good get. Tony.
An outstanding entry from Steve Cusack of West Coburg. This is an absolute belter. In fact, you did put a lot of effort into it.
What are some of the highlights there, Tony?
Ian Cooper, whilst playing for Hampton Rovers in the amateurs against Coburg, he had his toupee ripped off. He was seen running across the ground, covering his head with his hand, jumped the fence, ran into a group of nearby houses and didn't reappear. President of the club, George Harris, for his gracious speech after the 1979 Grand Final at Princes Park. We stuffed it up them. What's better than beating Collingwood by 10 goals, beating them by 5 points? Graham Richmond, the secretary, for taking his duties to the limit during the half-time brawl at Windy Hill. And Chairman of Selectors, Wes Lofts, Carlton, who during the 1981 cliffhanger at Princes Park between Carlton and Essendon, when Neil Danaher kicked the Bombers back into the game after the Blues were miles in front, Wes, in a fit of temper, smashed his fist into adjacent wall and actually activated the Carlton theme song through the public address system. Unfortunately, there was still 3 minutes to play and Essendon got up and won by a point. Oh. Steve, that's a great entry. In fact, that is... Yeah,
that is a good one.
Yeah.
Gibson Chemicals have come through on the fax again, and I only give them a mention because I think they're angling for a job as sub-editor down there at the Sunday Press. They've gone with newspaper headlines for their various petulant acts, some of the good ones of which are Burke of Collingwood, and I think we all remember the Burke incident.
What was the headline that time?
The headline they had, where Burke kicked the umpire, their headline was, "Umpire Down, Lakeside Massacre," which I thought Scotty Palmer would have been very happy with that, I think, from the subby. When Bazasto put his fist through the plate glass window over in Western Australia, they went with the headline, "Champion Attempts Suicide, I Would Rather Die Than Return to Carlton," says Pete. And Mal Brown in the 1972 All-Australian Championship, you'll recall, he hit a number of Carlton players. Headline, "Cop That Blues, Says Mal," which I think might have been an actual headline in the Sunday Press that day.
In fact, I've had a rethink about it. Steve Cusack, I'll read a couple more of Steve's, very, very good. To Chris Martin at South Ballarat, and to someone instruct Tommy and Harry how to use a mobile telephone faction. That is a very funny gag, that, from Gary Curley. Fantastic. Just a couple of things. I know we shouldn't backtrack, but Steve's entry was fantastic. Yes, you got all the right ones. One that I did like in 1969, the whole Dandenong football side, when playing Port Melbourne, walked from the field before the start of the game after a major break because Port goaled from a free against Dandenong's Jim Miller. One of the great things. Shane Zantuck, Ron Barassi, actually a petulant act, Ron Barassi, for taking Malcolm Blight from the ground after Blight showing initiative, kicked a 120-yard goal over his shoulder from the boundary line. And another couple of things too about the Essendon Social Club. Ian Collins for describing Marty Christensen as being immoral, for telling the truth. And Chris Martin, one that I absolutely adored. Robbie Muir, playing for East Ballarat, was being given constant abuse by supporters at Golden Point, so he jumped the fence and proceeded to hop into them. But Steve Cusack, a couple more from Steve. The other one, Des Tuddenham.
Now, who's the winner?
Just
let me say before you announce the winner that the Telecom boys are back for the first time this year, and good to see you back, guys. Didn't win the competition this week. Now, they claim it took Doug Wade 5 minutes to come off the ground that time that Barassi dragged him at the VFL Park, but another entry said it took 2 minutes 15 seconds, so I don't know which of them had the stopwatch on it, but you recall that when he walked, instead of walking across the boundary, he walked to the centre.
Went the long way.
He went on the two sides rather than the hypotenuse.
Oh, I think was good get.
Yeah.
One I was hoping for, it must have surely bobbed up, was the fabulous Mel Brown breaking the microphone in half and then throwing it in the rubbish bin incident.
At the onside, the on-ground interview, yes, that did pop up.
Another one in one of the entries I like, I forget who it was player somebody O'Brien of Melbourne in the early 80s, had broken clear and had no one between him and the goals, was running, bouncing the ball, only to be pulled up by the umpire's whistle. There was a free behind play. In a fit of pique, he threw the ball to the ground, stamped his foot and did his knee and had to go off, and it was the end of his career.
Yes, and another one too, another one that we all remember, is when Percy Jones missed a goal at Carlton and he started kicking the point post, was it, or something like that? I just remember that.
And the Brad Hardy jumper, of course, was in most entries.
Well, Steve Cusack, sorry, Steve, for mucking up your name, from Cusack, from West Coburg, you are the winner. Des Tuddenham for being refusing to accept being sacked by Essendon.
Oh, that's right, and he kept turning up to train.
That's correct. Brad Hardy, Doug Booth, Ken Boyd for owning up to KOing Big John Nichols after the match and ended up getting 12 weeks. Shane Zantuck, John Burke, Jeff Rosenow, I don't quite remember that one.
Oh, that was a famous incident down at Geelong.
Yes.
And he had a go
playing Goliath to Alan Killigrew.
Alan Killigrew, yeah. And
Just thanks, Julian, for that. Another good one too that he had, Gerard Healy, for a little indiscretion in Adelaide late at night.
We won't go into the detail.
I don't think so, no. Peter Moore, of course, had to be in it. Sorry, I know a lot of people thought it was tried.
His gracious acceptance of the losers' medal.
And one of the great ones too was Mel Brown for pushing the ball into the umpire's face and copping 6 weeks. And there are plenty. You've done a lot of work and you deserve to win.
Well done. And he's won, of course, goods to the value of $20 at the ABC shop in the State Bank Galleria. And for those people who've been inquiring here at 3LO about availability of stocks of the latest Could Have Been Champions LP on the bench with the Could Have Been Champions, I can tell you that the ABC shop and all outlets throughout the city, suburban and country areas have just recently been restocked up. So if you're still anxious to get a copy of On the Bench, it's now back out there. Now, to win the competition next week, Tony, what do the entrants have to do? A bit of work has to be put in, but hang on to your footy records today and get with your mates. We'd like you to pick you a side of recruits, names of recruits that have come from unusually sounding towns. And Trevor Poole is the benchmark. Where was Trevor recruited from? I won't give that one away. I'll let people look it up because last night's footy record, some of them might have tossed it away. Although I'm sure there's a few who'll be souveniring it. So basically what we're after... A hint here, Tony, is one that... Champs and I often talk about because he's got that connection down there with the West Gippsland League through the Druin Footy Club, and a club down there is the Rythdale Officer Cardinia. That's the sort of thing we're looking for, aside from the backline of players who've been recruited from the most unusual sounding names for the clubs. Get that entry together, post it in here, and please post early because we're still getting a disappointing...